Well, of course, I told her that was no way to act for a lady, getting all gussied up, batting her eyes at a man half her age. Times are changing, Martha. She's only 3 years older. It's still wrong. And she calls herself a Christian. Well, I heard that she even... Wait. Michael Martin, is that you on this line? You better get off of here, or I'm gonna...
Okay, kids. That was not a Facebook chat. That was not a Skype session. And in case you haven't noticed, this is a phone, but it doesn't have a screen. I know, archaic. But back in the day, this was the bee's knees, because it had buttons, not a dial. It was called a party line. And a lot of us grew up with them. And basically, they were shared phone lines. So sometimes when you picked it up, you'd hear things that you weren't supposed to hear.
He wouldn't take no for an answer, I'm telling you. Kept buying me gifts, often would take me to dinner, and the flowers and candy, it just... Is someone there?
As you might imagine, this created some, well, you could call it sport. In a world where there were only a handful of TV channels or only one radio in the house, the old-style telephone could become quite the source of entertainment. And while there were far fewer party lines around when I was growing up, back in the day, everybody had them, including my Uncle Joe. Now, Joe was a wiry 12-year-old kid who was just young enough not to get drafted into World War II and not big enough to sell himself off as old enough to go, which a lot of boys did. And he and his friend Sticks, they had something of a job in the town. Rascals, rapscallions, ne'er-do-wells, troublemakers. And if they weren't fishing Joe and Sticks, they were playing tricks. Stealing a pie off of Mrs. Wood's windowsill. Grabbing an apple or two from the vendor at the farmer's market. One time they even tried their hand at cow tipping. You know cow tipping? Where you sneak up on a cow, usually at night, and you push it real hard sideways, because cows don't really do sideways, and it goes, tip! Except Joe and Sticks, they weren't quite heavy enough to pull off the job. By the way, that's the day they also learned the cows are surprisingly fast. Sticks got butted, but Joe said it was okay. I mean, he was cracked there already. But the focus of most of that youthful, slightly evil energy was old man Connor. And Joe and Sticks, they loved playing stuff on him because no one liked old man Connor. Old man Connor was mean. Old man Connor, he wouldn't do Halloween. He would put a sign on his gate, a gate where there were all these weeds growing up. You could hardly get it open. And it said, "Keep out, troublemakers." And so Joe and Sticks, they'd hop the fence. And they were always dressed in black for Halloween. Somehow their costumes always required black. They'd hop that fence and they'd peer in the windows to see where old man Connor might be sitting that night. And on their favorite Halloween, old man Connor was sitting by the fire with his cat, Mr. Edders, sitting on his lap. And so Joe got out his tic-tac. Now a tic-tac was an old wooden spool that had thread on it when it was bought. And Joe had cut notches in the two wheels on the outside and wrapped string around it, and he had a nail for the axle, and he put it up against the window, and he pulled it, and it made a terrible sound. And Mr. Edders the cat, he stood straight up. Gave old man Connor some free acupuncture. 18 holes later, old man Connor's jumping up and down and screaming and going for a shotgun, but Joe and Sticks, they were long gone. Nobody liked old man Connor. He's mean. One time the kids snuck up on his porch and they taped a tack to his door, nice and low. And then they blew up this huge balloon and taped that to the floor, right where that tack would go. And sure enough, when old man Connor opened his door to get his mail, boom! It's hard to run when you're laughing so hard. But man, the telephone, The telephone provided their greatest source of entertainment in the war against Old Man Connor. Because you see, kids, back then, nobody could tell who was calling. So you could play tricks on folks. Tricks like, hello, is Frank Walls there? Is Peggy Walls there? Is Joe Walls there? Are there any walls in your house? Well, then what's holding up your roof? Or this one. Yeah, this is Roots Appliances. Yeah, we're checking all appliances in town. Yeah. Can you tell me, is your refrigerator running? Well, don't you think you ought to catch it then? Well, Joe and Sticks love this stuff. But you have to remember, there wasn't any Instagram, there wasn't any Snapchat, there wasn't any Facebook, there wasn't any video games. Heck, they didn't have an Etch-a-Sketch. You had to make your own fun, sometimes from scratch. And that meant sometimes a neighbor like Old Man Connor, he's going to be the butt of the joke. Well, one day Joe and Sticks were picking up the phone to call their nemesis just one more time, but they didn't expect to hear Old Man Connor on the line.
Lily, come home just this one day. Daddy, you know I can't.
Well, Joe and Sticks almost fell over with excitement. They had listened in on 100 phone calls. They knew more about dirt than the ditch digger. They knew about stuff that they didn't even understand. But now maybe they could get something nice and juicy on Old Man Connor.
Lily, please. Daddy, I told you, I have a job here and I can't just leave whenever. It's not whenever. I'm gonna be 85 next Saturday. Lily, there's not a lot of birthdays left. Oh, you're always saying that, but you always are there for the next one. Lily, please. I don't want to be alone. I miss your mom. Well, maybe if you'd be nicer to people and to me, you wouldn't be alone. Lord knows you never thought of me on my birthday. I'll make it up to you. Lily. Lily?
She'd hung up. Funny thing, when Joe and Sticks heard that click on Old Man Connor's line, they weren't feeling so delighted anymore. And Joe, he went to bed that night with kind of a sick feeling in his stomach. That Sunday, 6 days before Old Man Connor's birthday, Joe got dragged, as he always got dragged, to Sunday school. And his teachers, they were talking about Samuel and how God called Samuel and how God called him again and again, like you might call me. And Samuel was confused, but he finally understood God was calling him. It was funny, Joe thought. Sticks was kind of asleep in the corner at this point. It was funny how it sounded like God called Samuel almost like on the telephone, for real, and his hand shot up. And Mrs. Edburn, the teacher, she looked a little surprised. Joe was more likely to be throwing spitballs than listening. Yes, she said. Mrs. Edburn, do you think, Joe said, do you think God calls us now like he called Samuel? Well, sure, Joe, she said, but just not out loud like that all the time. Then what, Mrs. Edburn, he said, what would God say to us if he bothered to call us now? And Mrs. Edburn reached for her Bible, and Joe immediately feared the worst. But he was surprised when he heard her read. Then the righteous will answer him, Lord, when was it that we saw you hungry and gave you food, or thirsty and gave you something to drink? And when was it that we saw you a stranger and welcomed you, and naked and gave you clothing? And when was it that we saw you sick and in prison and visited you? And the king will answer them, truly I tell you, when you did it for the least of my brothers and sisters, you did it for me. And just like that, Joe knew what to do. It was like Jesus had spoken right into his ear. It was like God had spoken right into his heart. Most of the time when you hear a story about a boy in the old days, you'll hear about his collection. You know, a cigar box filled with things like shiny stones or sea glass or a couple of baseball cards. And Joe and Styx, they had those things. They liked those things, of course. But they also had, for lack of a better word, a journal. And to be honest, it was not a good thing. It was not a nice thing. But it was a very powerful thing. You see, the boys had listened to dozens of conversations on party lines, and they had transcribed those conversations in that journal. And whenever they wanted to laugh hysterically, they simply acted those conversations out. I tell you, he won't take no for an answer. Oh, I'm so sorry, Martha, and I'm so worried he'll stop asking. But the short of it, between their party lines, those boys had dirt on everyone. All they had to do now was use it. Joe told Styx his plan, and Styx didn't much like it, but he agreed to help. Because, you know, there's a creed, right, between friends? The creed says friends help each other. Especially when your friend tells you that he's going to tell your mom, who really was throwing dry manure at a can on the back porch last spring and did not clean it up. They started with Mrs. Horowitz.
Who is this?
Thus saith the Lord.
What? Who is this?
Well, the boys. They were armed with a piece of wax paper and a toilet paper tube, and so they were undaunted. And they proceeded to tell Mrs. Horowitz that she and her family, food in hand, would show up at Old Man Connor's house that Saturday at 1 p.m. to help celebrate Old Man Connor's birthday.
Why would I want to visit that dreadful man?
Thus saith the Lord, thou didst steal the recipe for dill pickles you used at the fair last year from Millie Chambers.
How do you know that?
Saturday, 1 o'clock, or the truth shall set you free from your blue ribbon.
And so it went on. Call after call, the boys searched through their journal, and they masqueraded as the voice of God and threatened to reveal every secret that town had to reveal. Who was distilling what should not be distilled? Who went out drinking when they told their wife they were going to a Rotary meeting? Who was casting furtive eyes where furtive eyes should not be cast? We would call it blackmail. Joe and Styx, they called it the work of the Lord. The last call would be the hardest. That one was to Old Man Connor himself.
Hello.
Thus saith the Lord, thou shalt clean.
What? Who is this?
Thou shalt clean and receive guests on your birthday. If you turn any away, so shall it be for you when you reach my gates.
What? What kind of nonsense is this?
Your child will not come to you.
How do you know that?
She will not come because of your hard heart, because of your sin. Therefore I will provide you with more children. You will not turn them away. You will clean and welcome them when they come.
And the stage was set. And that Saturday, an old man, tired from cleaning, pulled the weeds off of his gate, and he opened up the gate. And at precisely 1 o'clock, Mrs. Horowitz, with her confused husband and daughter in tow, showed up on that front porch with a pie to celebrate Old Man Connor's birthday. And they were shocked when they were invited inside into a beautifully cleaned, if somewhat tired, old house. Next was Mr. Marshall with his confused family in tow. He was carrying a huge roast. The Emersons showed up with a green bean casserole. The Smiths came bearing some of the family recipe. Well, they just kept coming. And Old Man Connor, more and more confused, just kept welcoming them in. And the last two to knock on the door were Joe and Sticks, dressed in their Sunday best. Old man Connor glared. "And what do you want?" he said. "I might be old, but I'm not stupid. I've seen what you've done." Joe cleared his throat. "We just want to say we're sorry," he said. "And that we'll never do anything ever again," Sticks chimed in. And then Joe held up a bouquet that only could be described as a bunch of weeds. It's catnip," Joe said. It's for Mr. Edders." Well, Joe wasn't sure what to expect next, but he wasn't expecting that old man Connor, tears now filling his eyes, would gather those boys into his arms. Things were different after that. Old man Connor now seems to have something of an open-door policy. Neighbors helped him get his place cleaned up, and he's always donating something to help get a playground built or giving something to the school. And the party line, well, it's been a little kinder, a little gentler lately, as if gossip and backbiting don't go down well with a heart that's been warmed. Oh, and the journal. Yeah, the journal. They stopped adding to it. Because you see, that night, after the party, Joe opened up that journal one more time, and he giggled about how well everything had worked. And he wasn't much for making a phone call, but he thought he ought to call Sticks just once, one more time, to crow a little. But when he picked up that phone,
"You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. Now, stop."
Joe couldn't place the voice. Maybe it was the preacher talking to someone. Maybe it was a couple of friends making up. But Joe got the message. No more listening on the party line. No more having fun with other people's lives. He'd have to find some other way to get into trouble.